That's all I really know about him.
Yes, he was born into slavery, but was separated from his mother early on in life. He was later on taught how to read and write by his master's wife, and his master ended up finding out and did not approve of it and would beat Douglas up. But that didn't stop Douglas from teaching the other slaves how to read and write.
Didn't he write something?
Yes, he was actually one of the most celebrated writers from the African American tradition. His first autobiography was one of the most widely read in North America. Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass was his first autobiography out of 3. In the beginning of the first chapter, he explains that he never knew his age or when he was born. He had been told he was around the age of 24 to 28. He had been separated from his mother at the age of 7, but she would sneak out of her master's house late at night and walk a couple of miles to see Frederick. His mother would lie down with him, and when he woke, she was gone. When they were together at night, they wouldn't talk much. When she passed away, his masters would not let him see her ill, die, or attend the burial. Douglas never met his father, but there are rumors that his father was white and was his old master. If a child was born from a slave, he or she must follow the conditions of the mother. He goes on further to say, they are, in the first place, a consistent offense to their mistress. She is ever disposed to find fault with them. They can seldom do anything to please her. She is never better pleased than when she sees them under the lash, especially when she suspects her husband of showing to his children favors to which he withholds from the black slaves. The master is frequently compelled to sell his class of his slaves out of deference to the feelings of his white wife. And cruel as a deed may strike to anyone to be, for a man to sell his own children to human flesh, it is often dedicate of humanity for him to do so. For unless he does this, he must not only whip them himself, but stand by and see one white son tie up his brother, but a few shades complexion than himself, and apply the glory of lash to his naked back. And if he lifts one word of the disapproval, it is set down to his parental partiality, and only makes a bad matter worse, both for them, himself, and a slave whom would protect and defend. Frederick went on to tell us stories on what he had experienced and witnessed, as in the slaves' whippings, both male and female.
Frederick's second autobiography is called My Bondage and My Freedom. This autobiography explains experiences in his life as well as struggles he faced with slavery. Frederick learned to read and write from his master's wife, who he called Miss Old. He describes Miss Old as a most kind and tender-hearted woman, and the simplicity of her mind she set out, when I first went to live with her, to treat me as she supposed one human being ought to treat another. She made it her initial goal that he was able to read and write. The wife would be scolded if the master found out she was teaching him to read and write. But that didn't stop her. After multiple times of the master telling her to not teach him, she would only continue, and each time she only grew more and more passionate. Frederick talks about how his relationship with Miss Old was different, because she didn't look at him as just a slave. She saw him for just a human being. Although for being caught so many times trying to read, he was not able to be in a separate room from the family for a long period of time, because his master would suspect he was just trying to learn. Frederick found a little loophole, and while he would go out and run his errands, he would find his white playmates in the street, and since he always carried a small copy of Webster's spelling book in his pocket, he would have the boys help him practice spelling. In exchange, he would give the boys bread as his tuition fee. All the little boys that helped him were all against the slave system and wanted justice for him as much as he did. These boys said they believed I had as good as a right to be free as they had, and that they did not believe God ever made anyone to be a slave. Frederick comes to a realization that every state would keep adding something just to keep him a slave, and he thought he was going to be a slave for life. I have often wished myself a beast or a bird, anything rather than a slave. His mistress eventually stopped teaching him, and Frederick knew exactly why, but he grew very sad over it and changed his writing. He said that nature had made us friends, slavery made us enemies.
Frederick Douglass escaped on September 3, 1838. He was 20 years old at the time. He escaped from his master in Baltimore. Before his escape, he was known as Frederick Bailey. Soon after, he changed it to Frederick Douglass. Mr. Douglass had disguised himself as a black sailor. He had gotten a sailor's protection pass in which he needed for his plan. He had borrowed this document from a free African-American seaman who, even though didn't look like the sailor, still used his pass. He was nervous that he would get caught and sent back to his master. To avoid this, he went on last minute. Douglass had many occasions of getting caught, but luckily, he never did. He arrived in New York almost 24 hours after departing from Baltimore. Even though he was in New York, that didn't mean he was free. People had been searching for slaves to bring them back during this time. To avoid getting caught, he changed his name to what we know as today as Frederick Douglass. Soon after his escape, he started to write what we know now as the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, along with his other autobiographies.